Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brandon Stark. I am the director of the UC Center of Excellence on Unmanned Aircraft System Safety, or the commander of drones, drone czar. I forgot all the other titles people keep giving me. But I'm the one who does all the paperwork for drones in the UC system through UC Merced, through UC San Diego, through UC Berkeley, UC Davis. I used to be a drone flyer. I used to fly a lot. But then as one does, one gets promoted, and then I do paperwork now. So these days, I mostly focus in on drone laws and regulations. Now, this is a fun topic for me. I could talk about, well, rather, I can drone on about drones all day long. I teach a drone class. My students will tell you that I just talk about drones absolutely nonstop. But I only have just a short amount of time with you guys today to talk to you about drone safety and regulations. So I'm going to keep this fairly brief, fairly short. I'm definitely not going to go into all of the details about drone laws and regulations. But if you have any questions, any specific scenarios, I'm happy to answer questions, and we're going to gather up in groups later this hour for you guys to start asking some very pointed questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into things. I don't think we have any announcements to make. So let's just try to get going so that we don't all get into the post-lunch coma. So what is the most important thing about drone laws or drones? The number one big drone law: don't do anything stupid or reckless. You wouldn't think that it needs to actually be a law, but yeah, it's part of our 107 regulations: no reckless or hazardous activities. What do you mean by reckless or hazardous? Well, battling drones in your power lines seems like a bad one. Picking up people and throwing them around, battling, right? I'm just pulling out comics and screenshots from cartoons. That's very interesting to me about all of the instances that we see drones in pop culture these days, and just how, as one would expect, how illegally they're using them. You can YouTube up drones and all those YouTube videos, and I'll tell you about 90% of them are breaking some drone law out there. But again, the most important thing, think about, try to avoid reckless activity. What defines as reckless is a little bit more nebulous, and we're going to talk to you throughout the day here today and tomorrow about how we better define what reckless activity is. So once we agree that we're not going to do anything stupid or reckless with our drones, the other big 6 drone laws: we must register all of our drones, except if it weighs under 0.55 pounds. We'll talk about all those little details. You must have a drone license, except when you're exempt. You may need to get authorization when you're flying around airports. Not always. Depends on the airport itself. Very location dependent. You may not fly beyond visual line of sight. You must be able to see your drone and assess risk at all times while the drone is in flight. You must, and then there's, of course, without all these things, there's an exception to that. We'll get to that. Number 5, no flying above 400 feet above ground. Most cases, with some exceptions. And no flying over people. And this is actually a recent drone change, unless you're a certified category 1, 2, 3, or 4 drone. If you don't know what that means, then most likely your drone is not certified as one of those 4 categories. These are our big 6 drone laws. There's obviously a whole contingent of other ones, but these are the big 6, the major ones that most critical for you to think about. But as you notice, there's a whole lot of exceptions to all of these. And this is where our drone laws get somewhat convoluted, complicated, or exciting, depending on your consideration of laws and policy. So we'll talk about these into a little bit of detail, but it would take us hours and hours to get into all of these completely. We don't have that kind of time, so we're just going to give this, again, a pretty high level overlook. So drone registration. The only real valid drone registration site is fadronezone.fa.gov. Please write this down. Please remember this site, because if you just Google up drone registration, there are plenty of scam sites out there that will try to redirect you. It is fadronezone.fa.gov. And this is the home page. You got the little aircraft right there, and they'll switch between planes, the quadrotors, and helicopters and whatnot. This is the site that you register your drones. All of your drones that weigh more than 0.55 pounds, 250 grams, and less than 55 pounds, you can register on this site. If your drone weighs more than 55 pounds, then you have to go through an old paper process for registering your drone. But if you're over 55 pounds, you're not a small drone, and a Part 107 drone license does not apply to you. If you're under 250 grams, you don't have to register here, except if you're using this for a commercial activity or a non-recreational activity. So I would imagine that most of you, if you're using this for your academic, your research purposes, or your state position, you may actually need to register your drones under 250 grams. It, of course, again, depends on some other factors there. If you're flying it just for fun, though, you would not need to register under 250 grams. What does a 250-gram drone look like? Let's see. Here's one of them. So this is Mavic Mini 2. This is about the extent, as big as the under 250-gram drone, as big as they get. Now, registration isn't difficult. It's not hard. You go to this webpage. It costs $5 per drone, and it takes you about 5 minutes to register. So compared to how expensive our drones normally are, that $5 is, a pretty small expense. You're going to want to spend even more money on all the other equipment for your drone, prop guards, sunshades, and all that other supplementary equipment that we'll talk about later in the week. Once you register your drone, you must put your registration tag on your drone, or that registration number on your drone. You'll notice as you walk through and took a look at all the drones, we have all of our registration numbers here on the drone printed, either with a label maker. Here, Sean, this looks like yours. You just tape the certificate on top of your drone. That works too. Let's see over here. On this drone, we just drew it in with a marker, right? All it has to be is somewhere on the outside of your drone. You cannot place the registration tag inside of any battery compartment or inside the drone. It must be on the outside of the drone. Your drone license is going to be an important part of your drone experience, but you may not always need that drone license. There is the big exemption. If you're flying only for recreational purposes, formerly known as the model aircraft exemption, you do not need a Part 107 drone license. However, there are rules that you do need to follow. Primarily, you would have to follow operated within the programming of a community-based organization set of safety guidelines. The AMA, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, is the largest, most well-known of these community-based organizations, the CBO, and they will tell you such hopefully common sense things such as no flying near people, no flying over highways, right? What are some other common sense ones? You know, make sure you always stay within visual line of sight, and a whole bunch of other just, you know, common ones. Basically, they want you to fly in empty fields with defined safety buffers and whatever safety requirements are applicable to that area. But there's also another exemption that came out relatively recently. I say recently, but I guess it's now been 4 years. We've lost all track of time now. In October 28, there was a change in regulations from Congress. They decided that there is now a special exemption for institutes of higher education. So anyone in an institute of higher education doing academically related work, not just coursework, but also research as well, may be exempt from the licensing requirement. But of course, not all academic or educational activities can be done in compliance with the safety guidelines. You still have to follow the safety guidelines of, say, the AMA. And we can imagine we do a lot of work out in the middle of nowhere where you may not need the drone license, but if you're flying in a crowded area, you couldn't abide by the AMA safety guidelines, and therefore you would also still need that 107 drone license. So the one way that I like to kind of split out the differences between our two requirements here, if you are following under the Part 107 drone laws, you need the drone license. You can fly for any purpose. You fly, or you're restricted to only flying when it is safe, meaning if you can secure a location for 10 minutes during your flight operation, then that's safe enough for your flight operation. You can request the special permissions from the FAA. We'll get to some of those, including flying above certain limited altitude restrictions, or even applying for some of the waivers for some of those drone laws. If you're going to follow under the academic or recreation exception, you must have a new trust certificate. A trust certificate is the recreational UAS safety test. And I am disappointed that I did not put a link on there, but you could Google up FAA trust test. It is an online test. It is free. It'll take you about 20-25 minutes to go through. It is an introduction to drone laws and safety, a test that you take through the FAA's educational partners. And it says that you've learned enough about drones that you can fly for fun or for certain academic use cases. Yes. Yes. You'll find a handful of links to them. The AMA is one such educational partner. There's a couple ones like Drone University, Embry-Riddle School of Aeronautics. There's a handful of them. I think there's about 25 trust certificate providers. When you're operating under the recreational exception, you can only fly for recreational purposes or approved educational activities. So no flying for real estate, no flying for commercial operations, only for your coursework, only for certain academic research projects, or only flying for fun. And you're going to be restricted to only flying in safe locations. There's a distinction here. For recreational, you're only flying in safe locations. But under 107, you can fly when it is safe. So a safe location is an empty field. When it is safe is the road is clear for that 10 minutes while you're doing your drone operation. So when you have your license, you are afforded the authority to make your decisions and assess your risk on safety. They are trusting you to make the right safety decisions. Without the 107 license, they're assuming that you should only be flying at a safe location in an empty field because you have not yet learned enough to make those safety assessments. Now, of course, again, this is a fairly coarse summary. There is certainly a lot of nuance depending on a lot of other specific mission details. I see we have a lot of questions in there. Yeah, let me run through a couple of these questions real quick. Let's see here. Any special requirements for homemade 3D printed drones? I'm assuming this is a relationship to, say, registration. No, there's no special restrictions to 3D printed or home built. They all count as drones. In fact, as you register your drone, there is a button that you will click that says, this is a home built drone. But otherwise you go through the same process. Does every educational institution have to have a committee or office to approve UAV education activities? Ooh, this is a complicated one. Ooh, okay, how to answer this one succinctly. The congressional language is that it has to be approved educational activities. That's the congressional language. How that approval process is handled is up to the institutes of education. So through the UC system, we handle that through a centralized system for reviewing flight activity and documentation and things like that. At other universities or institutes of higher education, you may opt to have a different approval process that may not even require people. So it is for the institution to decide to assess how that approval process is handled. If you have one drone, can it be used for both recreational and for work? Yes, absolutely. The difference between recreation operations and working operations is only on the purpose of the activity. And you know, Andy, I'm reminded of a slide that you had put together many years ago of a fun slide, and I wish I still had that slide, of a person flying a drone for work, and then he puts on a Hawaiian shirt, and then he's not flying for work anymore. And it's again, just the purpose of the flight operation. The drone could be the same, the person could be the same. It's just whether or not you're wearing the work hat or the fun hat. That's what changes. If you do use it for any sort of work or non-recreational activity, then it must be registered individually. But otherwise, you could be using it for either use case. Okay. So real quickly, some common drone regulatory violations. The two big ones that we see the most, especially on YouTube, visual line of sight operations and flying over people. And this is just a fun picture. This is got it from the BBC in like 2012, 2013. Clearly, this is a criminal activity because he's got the ski mask on and everything. Right? This is clearly how criminals fly drones, exactly like that. You know, Lego actually made a Lego set, the Sky Force, and their villain is a drone pilot. It's hilarious. So, visual line of sight. Visual line of sight is not just being able to see the drone, you must be able to assess the risk of the drone. So here's my little stick figure infographic here. It's not just being able to see the drone, it has to be able to see whether or not that drone is operating safely. So if we're flying, you know, above us or near us, and we're still able to see the drone clearly, we can tell which direction it's facing, and we can assess that it's not flying over anyone, and that there's nothing that could be flying into the drone, then it's safe. If we are flying, say, above a visual obstruction, we really can't see what's right here, we would not be able to tell if someone, say, walked onto there, and we may not be adequately assessing risk as we're flying over that visual obstruction. It would be completely unsafe. We might still be able to see the drone, but if we can't assess the risk of the area underneath the drone, then we are operating unsafely. Now, are there ways around this? Of course. If we had some way to determine that this area was going to be safe to be operating in, then we could operate like this. What if we had blocked off this entire area with fences and then no one could get in? Well, that is our way to assess the risk that we've blocked off this area. We may even just have a person there, physically keeping people out. That would also help. As long as, again, we can assess the risk of the area that we have no visibility to. So visual line of sight, not only sorry. There we go. Not only must we know the drone's location, we must be able to determine the altitude, attitude, altitude, and direction of flight. How high is it, which direction it's pointing in, where it is. We must be able to assess the airspace for other air traffic and other hazards. Can we see whether or not the helicopter is going to be attacking us or whatnot? And we must determine whether or not the unmanned aircraft does not endanger the life or property of another. The other major violation that we see, especially on YouTube videos, is operations over other people. Wearing personal protective equipment, PPE, or giving prior notice does not absolve your responsibility to comply with these laws, saying you are not allowed to fly over other people. So if you're operating in an area, there must not be a person underneath your drone. Now, oh, I wish I had a whiteboard. Sorry, I'm trying to use this pen option. It's not drawn on the screen. Maybe if I draw over here, no, nope. Okay, maybe I'll just demonstrate this with a drone here. Now, when they say you must not operate over a person, they mean this quite literally. See, this is over me. This is not over me. Over me, not over me. Now, this equation is a little bit harder to solve when this is, say, 400 feet above me. So it's not just absolutely directly above. See, part 107.39 says you must not be directly over me. Point 107.19 or 19C says that if this drone were to fall, it would not hit me. So not only can it not be directly above me, if this drone falls for whatever reason, it should not be able to hit me. So that will encompass this operation where it's over here and falling to the side on top of me. So in general, if there are people in your operational zone, you should not be flying in there. You should kick those people out. Now, there are some exceptions to that. If the people that you are flying over are part of the safety of your operation, meaning they are there to help keep your drone safe, say you're a visual observer out in the field, you can fly over your visual observer. However, if they are just an actor, part of your operation, they're an actor, but they're not involved in the safety of your drone operation, you are not allowed to fly over them. So a little bit more details there. Now, hopefully that's not too confusing, but unfortunately it's getting more confusing as we go along. We have a couple of new drone laws that just came out in the past year, a couple ones that you might have heard of, and a couple ones that you may not have heard of. The next upcoming drone law that's halfway through implementation is remote identification. Starting in September of this year, all drones sold in the US must have remote ID on or capable on your drone. Now, most of our DJI platforms are already remote ID capable. So if you're buying through DJI, you're probably going to be okay. Remote identification is going to have your drone send out a pulse of information, a radio signal that gives away your drone's location, but also the control station's location. It is going to be, the drone itself will be broadcasting where itself is and where the pilot is throughout the entirety of the flight. This transmission will be handled over radio signals, either through a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connection as a special type of a Wi-Fi Bluetooth packet. Its exact implementation is going to vary between manufacturers. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out over this next year and a half. By September of 2023, every drone must have remote ID turned on, which for the most part will be firmware updates going out to all of you with your drones. Another set of regulations that came out fairly recently was the drone rule flying over people. A whole new classifications of drones that would be certified to fly over people. The drones that we currently have right now, especially all in front of us here, are all the class 0 or unlabeled drones that are not certified for flying over people. There are 4 other drone classes that are certified for flying over people. Class 1 are for drones that weigh less than 250 grams and have prop guards. So our little Mavic Mini, it does not have prop guards. If we were to add prop guards, it would weigh over 250 grams. It is unfortunately not class 1 compliant. There are a couple of drones that are class 1 compliant. A group, kind of a classification known as Cinewhoop. There's these little tiny drones with guarded, shielded propellers and a little GoPro on top of them. You can fly those over people. A lot of FPV racers will use those very small drones. Actually, quite a lot of fun. Aircraft categories class 2 and 3 are certified by the FAA that if you are injured by one of them, it will not kill you. There's a whole set of complex equations on how you certify a drone for class 2 or 3. It is on the manufacturer to get that class certification. So that's not something that you would need to do. You will have a label on your drone that says this drone is class 2 compliant or class 3 compliant. They hopefully will start selling those drones relatively soon. And class 4 is for the upcoming set of drones, most likely to be used for things such as drone delivery services. So your Amazon delivery drones, your UPS delivery drones, those will all be class 4 category for flying over people. That typically means that they've got some sort of parachute or other means of making it safe so that it doesn't kill you if it crashes on top of you. Upcoming next, they are working on this one right now beyond visual line of sight operations. So right now we're restricted to only flying our drones as close as we can see them, but that's changing. They're working on this set of drone laws. Who knows when it's going to be coming out, but it is, they're working on the rulemaking proposal committee, and then it has to be finalized into a proposal, and then it has to be finalized. So we're in step 1 of 3-ish. We'll likely see what that's going to look like in maybe next year, and it might be enacted probably earliest 2024. So we've got a little bit of extra time. Okay. A couple of other quick provisions. So the drone can fly up to 4 feet above the ground, but there's an exception to that. If you're flying within 400 feet of a structure, man-made structure, you can fly 400 feet above that structure. So if you are flying within 400 feet of a 400-foot tall building, you can fly up to 800 feet. But as soon as you're more than 400 feet away from that building, you must drop down again to 400 feet. Now, how many of you know how tall 400 feet is? It's pretty tall. It's really tall. So thinking about flying higher than that, well, yeah, maintaining visual line of sight above those altitudes is actually quite difficult. Let's see, you can't operate within, here's the details on that airport stuff. Class B, Class C, Class D airspace, or within the lateral confines, surface Class E, designated for an airport, without authorization from air traffic control. We'll talk about this more tomorrow on our indoor portion of your flight training. You can only fly your drone when the visibility is greater than 3 miles. How many of you drove in today? What do you think the visibility was today? Not 3 miles. We may have to delay our first flights tomorrow until we get that 3 mile visibility. Okay, it's supposed to be sunny all day, then we might be good. But definitely this morning was a no fly. Yes. Under the cloud deck? Under the cloud deck, you can see for 3 miles. Oh yeah, that's fine. Now, but of course, you have to be flying below the cloud layer. That's my next bullet point there. You have to be at least 500 feet below clouds and 2,000 feet away from clouds. Now, you may not think that you're going to be flying next to clouds all too often, but the FAA also considers fog to be cloud, so you must stay away from fog as well. If you're from the Central Valley like I am, you know that in the wintertime we get tule fog. That will drop our visibility down to 10 feet. All sorts of fun. We must make sure that we do not fly in those poor weather conditions. Yes? There is no laws against flying in excessive wind speed. If your drone is capable of flying in 50-mile-an-hour winds, then you may fly in 50-mile-an-hour winds. It is only about visibility. Now, you should not be flying when it is unsafe to be flying. So your drone may not be rated or capable of that wind speed. Because you must, before you fly, always do a pre-flight assessment. Assess the environment, the wind, do your crew briefings and equipment checks before any flight. We will go over this, all over this tomorrow as well. And if you have any accident that results in a serious injury, loss of consciousness, or damage in excess of $500, you must report it to the FAA within 10 days. How often do you think people report their drone accidents? Never? Yeah. I sit on an FAA committee that we review those incident reports. We get, maybe 10 a quarter for all the drone pilots that we have in the US. Not a whole lot of people are reporting it there. I have plenty of more things to say about that one. Ooh, what about smoke from fires? Smoke is not a cloud. However, smoke will impede your visibility. If you have less than 3 mile visibility, you are not allowed to fly. So many questions, right? So many questions. So we have not just FAA drone laws to worry about. There are also other local drone laws to consider. Any regulatory agency can make regulations within their jurisdiction. Now, their jurisdiction is not the air, but land use, trespass, privacy, environmental conservation, or even insurance. So for example, in California, we don't require insurance for our drones, but North Carolina does. If you are operating a drone in North Carolina, you are required to have drone insurance for commercial purposes. All of our local agencies, our state agencies, the UC system, the CSU system, all of our state parks, they are allowed to say, you are not allowed to fly a drone while you are standing on our property. However, that extension does not apply to the airspace above the property. So a common loophole is for people to stand on the other side of the street and then fly over the property. On the other hand, again, environmental conservation laws are still applicable. If you see a drone, say, disturbing a nest, bird of prey nest or whatnot, that is still a finable offense through whatever California Department of Fish and Wildlife or NOAA or the applicable regulation. Some agencies prohibit drone use. Some agencies have an approval process. Some agencies allow drone use. These are things that you will have to look up and identify yourself. The responsibility is on the pilot to know and comply with all applicable regulations. Good luck. It can be difficult. There is no centralized database. And I know because I've tried. I put together, and we'll send out some links on this one. We'll talk about this one tomorrow when we have more time. I have myself a map on drone laws in California. All the city and county drone laws and state parks and whatnot. And it's quite complicated. But if you need to check the city and municipal codes, check with directors or on-site managers what their process is. But try to be good neighbors. You know, how we talk about drones certainly matters, right? I don't think we're necessarily going to be putting brown short pants on all of our drones, but we do need to put at least smiley faces on our drones so they're not as angry looking. Some other stuff, other legal questions that I get commonly. How do we do drone delivery service? It is going to be a whole set of regulations on a special commercial licensed activity. It requires special authorizations beyond the regular Part 107 drone licenses. So if you're thinking of building your own drone delivery service, it will take a little bit more extra time to put that together. Pesticide spraying with pesticides is a whole other ball game when it comes to drone regulations. Not that it can't be done, but I would recommend, especially in the state of California, that if you don't already have your agricultural spraying license through the DPR, you're probably better off finding someone who does. In order to do pesticide spraying through aerial application in the state of California, you must go through that DPR certification process, which is not a short or easy one. Flying over actors, again, you may not fly over your actors in your films. Should you get a drone license? I always say yes. Even if you're in academia, you should probably get your drone license. It will serve you better in the long run. And by the way, your drone licenses are lifetime certificates. You do need to get them renewed every 2 years, but you can let them lapse and then get them reactivated through an online test. It is now free for renewals. So once you pay your original certificate cost of $175, you are more or less going to be able to keep that drone license for the rest of your life, as long as you check in every 2 years to get that renewed, or at least before you start your drone flying again. So it's actually quite a good investment. However, getting your drone license will not make you a better drone pilot. The drone license teaches you about the laws, but not about how to actually fly a drone. That's why events such as this one right here, teaching you how to fly drones, are so important, because at least this week, we will give you hands-on flight time, things that you would not get through just going through the licensing process. Now, I am quickly running out of time. Oh, see, I drone on about drones. So many fun stuff. But we'll try to quickly finish out here, remembering, again, legal and safe are not synonyms. You can be legal, you can be safe, you should be legal and safe, but doing just one of those sets does not mean that you're doing things correctly. Safety is somewhat complicated. Think of safety as this chain, with each of the links being the man, the environment, and the machine. If you are weak in any one of those, then you are not safe. You must make sure that you are safe in all of these categories. There's a lot of tips and tricks that we use to make sure that we are maintaining our safety. We'll go through a couple of these tomorrow in more detail. The most simplest way that we can break this down, the big 4 safety checks: the drone, the airspace, the location, and the weather. And then surrounding here in the middle should be the pilot, right? So the drone, the airspace, the location, and the weather, make sure that all of those are safe. Now, I've said a lot, and I know that you have a whole lot more questions. And even if you don't have any questions right now, I'm sure that you will have questions in the future. So I'm going to ask that our drone experts in the room stand up. We've got a whole bunch of drone experts here. We got Sean, we have Andy, we have Corey, we have Justin, we have Paul, we have Becca. Eric, you're not standing up? Okay. You're our point person at UC San Diego. You are an expert. We have got my students, Jewel and Angel over there. Let's take some time to walk around, meet some of these drone experts, and ask them drone law questions, anything that you might have on your mind. Ask them, stump them with drone law questions. Absolutely, because this is DroneCamp. It's not enough for you guys to listen to me talk. You really need to engage, and we really want you to engage with everybody here. So track down one of our drone law experts. Go ahead and stand up, walk around, and ask them questions. And we'll have someone online answering our online Zoom participants as well.
Yeah, there's 34 folks. So anybody has a question, unmute yourself at a quiet moment or throw it in the chat window, and I will call Brandon over if I can't answer it, which is likely. But yeah. Okay, so the CSU have a central office to appropriate UAV educational activities. I will defer that one probably to Pat and Pietro.
Yeah, I thought one of them is the remote ID. And my understanding is that the FAA is working on specifications for what that would be, which would mean that DJI probably doesn't actually meet all of those specifications with what they provide today.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I heard a rumor that maybe they were going to push out the requirement for a new product because the specifications for what was broadcast and the format and stuff wasn't solidified yet.
Yeah, a good question. I don't know for sure. What I have heard, and I don't follow this too closely, is that DJI and other manufacturers on all of their new drones, they are installing the hardware components, the transponders or receivers or whatever, that will be compliant when the remote ID rules kick in and become enforceable. And it will just take a firmware upgrade to make them work. That's at a high level my partial understanding.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a Brandon question, and he's got a queue of people lined up. But you know what? We have this Google Doc where we're compiling questions, and I will throw that question. I'll throw the Google Doc URL in the chat window for general use.
Okay, the next one down is, does flying over people include people and vehicles and inside structures? And if you find that in the chat and then work your way down, then you'll be current.
Okay, let me up there. My understanding is that flying over cars and structures is not a risk. It's not something that you have to worry about for FAA regulations compliance.
So if you flew over road as an incidental item, that would be okay?
You know, that's a good question. Because I do remember in one of the recent FAA updates, they changed the rules. Like, you can't fly over a roadway like parallel. You know, like you can't fly right over it. But if you need to cross it in the course of doing a mission, that might be okay. That's another Brandon question. Sorry, we fly over fields, so we don't have to figure that out often. But yeah, let's throw that in the chat window, or sorry, in the Google Doc. I will bug Brandon to reply to those.
Oh yeah, the question looking down was mine as well.
The actual license or
Yes.
So does that?
Did he answer that verbally satisfactorily, or it's still confusing?
He did not talk about that when he was talking the presentation.
Okay.
Basically the scenario looked like the building was blocking the view for the area underneath where the drone was in the unsafe area. But if you can look down with a camera and you can inspect that area, theoretically, you could determine whether there could be a hazard down there.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So does that count? We don't know, huh?
That count for without visibility. When you say without visibility, what does that mean?
Well, in the scenario that he had on the slide, if the building was blocking what was underneath the drone when it was in the unsafe position.
Yes.
Right. And
okay, I see what you're saying.
So for instance, you could fly to the edge of that building where you could still see the drone, look down with the camera and inspect if you wanted to go farther. And the question is, would that count, or would you have to walk around the building and be able to see, direct line of sight?
This one, I believe the rules are pretty clear. You need direct line of sight. With the unaided eye. I think that's how it's
well, so assuming that you had direct line of sight of the drone, but not the area underneath the drone. That's the part that I find interesting about that scenario.
Yes, I see your point now. Yeah, I don't know. That's a branding question.
So this is how far away you can see a drone with 20/20 vision, is that it?
Yes, so the FAA rules, I believe, state the drone has to be within the visual direct line of sight with the unaided eye always. You can have visual observers for enhanced safety, and they could be, far away from you, and you could be talking remote, on radios or something. But the pilot in command needs to have direct line of sight on the drone at all times.
Or a safety assistant who's in direct communication with the pilot in charge. You can rely on that as well, right?
That's a Brandon question. I've always thought the pilot has to be able to see the drone. And that safety assistance can help, like point out the drone or look for obstacles in the air or on the ground. But the pilot in command needs to have direct line. You might be right though, but we can ask Brandon to verify that. It's probably in the FAA rules too. That's probably not a hard one to look up.
Yeah. Can you put the link for this, what's on the screen, the slide, in the chat?
Yes, the one that he's showing.
Yeah, that looks pretty useful.
Yes. How many people here have their Part 107 license or are working towards it? Oh, very good. So for those of you who've gotten your Part 107 license, especially if it's recent in the last year or so, any words of wisdom for other people who are still on the fence, or like how many hours did you spend studying for it? Did you find resources that were particularly awesome, that were helpful? Feel free to put some tips into our chat window. Oops. I gotta put a couple links as well for the Part 107. Okay, I didn't know Udemy had a Part 107 prep class. That's It's good to know. I've used the demo classes for other stuff. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm looking up the. We have a tech note on resources for preparing for the Part 107, which is pretty up to date. Go. Yeah, so there's lots of YouTube videos, as a couple people have mentioned. If you are the type of person who benefits from live back and forth with an instructor, either that helps you learn or kind of forces you to focus on preparation, there's online, there's flight schools. There's several that are online. Several of them will give you kind of like lifetime access to the content. I've seen that a few times. I've seen on Meetup, like pilots will once in a while run a class. So I would say it's not a difficult exam to find resources to prepare for. But it does, yeah, it probably takes 10 to 20 hours. 20 hours is probably what they recommend. A lot of the content is, I would almost call it like niche aviation knowledge. A lot of it is not terribly helpful for actually flying drones. But it's good preparation.
You have to do the Zoom thing with to look down on our equipment again.
Oh, okay. Guys, we have 1 minute to go and we need to switch sessions. So